This channel examines the Jeffrey Epstein case using court documents, public records, and verified reporting. We do not speculate. We do not accuse. We document what exists, and what remains unanswered. Everything presented here is drawn from publicly available sources. This is not a theory channel. This is the file. In legal proceedings, not all documents are immediately available to the public. Many records remain sealed, meaning access to them is restricted by court order. When these documents are later made available, they are described as unsealed. At first glance, unsealing may seem simple: documents are released, and the public can read them. But in reality, the process is more complex and carefully controlled. To understand what unsealed documents represent, it is important to begin with why documents are sealed in the first place. Courts may seal records for several reasons: to protect sensitive information, to preserve the integrity of an ongoing investigation, to safeguard the identities or privacy of individuals, to comply with legal or procedural requirements. Sealing does not remove a document from the legal system. Instead, it places it in a restricted category, where only authorized parties, such as judges, attorneys, or investigators, can access it. This means that sealed documents can still play a role in legal proceedings, even if they are not visible to the public. When a document is unsealed, that restriction is lifted, either fully or partially. This is a key point. Unsealing does not always mean complete transparency. In many cases, documents are partially unsealed, with certain sections redacted or withheld. This allows courts to balance public access with ongoing legal or privacy concerns. The timing of unsealing is also significant. Documents may remain sealed during an investigation or trial and only be released afterward. In other cases, they may be unsealed in stages, depending on legal developments. This creates a delayed visibility. Information that was once restricted becomes accessible later, often changing how a case is understood or interpreted. However, unsealed documents must still be approached carefully. They are part of the legal record, but they do not automatically represent proven facts. Some may contain allegations, preliminary findings, or statements that were never tested in court. This distinction is essential. Unsealed documents provide access to information, not necessarily confirmation of its accuracy or legal validity. Understanding what it means to unseal a document is the first step in interpreting their significance. They are not simply revelations, they are controlled releases of previously restricted material, shaped by legal decisions and procedural rules. The decision to unseal documents is not automatic. Courts do not simply release records without careful consideration. Instead, unsealing is guided by a balance between public access and legal protection. At the center of this process is the principle of transparency. Courts recognize that the public has an interest in understanding how legal decisions are made. Unsealing documents can provide insight into investigations, procedures, and the reasoning behind certain outcomes. However, transparency is not the only factor. Courts must also consider privacy, fairness, and ongoing legal risks. If releasing a document could harm individuals, interfere with legal proceedings, or expose sensitive information, it may remain sealed or only partially unsealed. This creates a balancing act. Judges weigh the public's right to know against the need to protect certain aspects of a case. The outcome of that balance determines whether a document is released, withheld, or redacted. Another key factor is the status of the case. Documents are more likely to be unsealed after major legal stages, such as the conclusion of a trial or the resolution of related proceedings. At that point, the risk of interference is reduced, making release more appropriate. Timing is critical. Releasing documents too early could influence witnesses, affect jury selection, or disrupt investigative work. Waiting until the appropriate moment helps preserve the integrity of the process. There is also the issue of legal requests. Parties involved in a case, such as attorneys or third parties, can file motions asking the court to unseal specific documents. These requests must be reviewed and approved by a judge, who determines whether the release is justified. This means unsealing is often the result of formal legal action, not just internal decisions by the court. Another important consideration is public interest. In high-profile cases, there may be increased demand for access to records. Courts may take this into account, especially when documents can help clarify widely discussed issues or correct misunderstandings. However, public interest alone is not enough. The material must still meet legal standards for release. Courts do not unseal documents simply because they are requested. They do so when the release aligns with legal and procedural requirements. There is also the possibility of partial disclosure. Instead of releasing an entire document, courts may redact certain sections. This allows key information to become public while still protecting sensitive details. The result is a controlled form of transparency. What becomes public is carefully selected and reviewed, ensuring that the release does not compromise legal protections. Understanding why courts unseal documents highlights an important point. Unsealing is not about revealing everything. It is about revealing what can be responsibly disclosed within the law. When documents are unsealed, the immediate question is often, what exactly do they reveal? The answer is not always straightforward, because unsealed records can include a wide range of content, each with different levels of reliability and legal significance. Unsealed documents are part of the official legal record. This means they were filed in connection with a case, submitted by attorneys, reviewed by the court, or included in legal proceedings. However, being part of the record does not mean that every detail within them has been proven or accepted as fact. The content typically falls into several categories. One common type is legal filings. These include motions, responses, and briefs submitted by both sides. Such documents outline arguments, present interpretations of evidence, and explain why certain decisions should be made. They are structured to persuade, not necessarily to provide a neutral account. Another category is supporting exhibits. These may include emails, records, logs, or other forms of documentation attached to filings. Exhibits are often used to illustrate a point or provide context, but their meaning depends on how they are interpreted within the case. There are also transcripts and testimony-related materials. These documents capture what was said during depositions or court proceedings. They provide direct insight into statements made under oath, but they still require careful interpretation, as testimony can be challenged or contradicted. In some cases, unsealed records include summaries or investigative references. These may describe findings, outline timelines, or reference additional material. However, they are often partial representations, not complete accounts of the underlying information. Another important aspect is redaction. Even when documents are unsealed, certain portions may be blacked out or removed. This can limit context, making it more difficult to fully understand the material without additional information. This leads to a key point. Unsealed documents provide access, not certainty. They show what was presented, argued, or recorded, but not necessarily what was proven in court. Some content may include allegations, disputed claims, or incomplete information. Because of this, interpretation must be careful. Reading an unsealed document requires distinguishing between what is asserted, what is supported by evidence, what is legally established. These are not always the same. Another factor is context. A single document may not tell the full story. It often needs to be understood in relation to other filings, timelines, and decisions within the case. Without that context, individual excerpts can be misleading. This is why unsealed documents are best viewed as pieces of a larger framework, rather than standalone conclusions. Understanding what these documents contain helps clarify their role. They are valuable sources of information, but they must be read with an awareness of their purpose, limitations, and legal context. When documents are unsealed, they are not always released in full. In many cases, portions of the material are redacted, meaning specific words, sentences, or entire sections are removed or obscured before public release. This creates a form of partial disclosure. At first glance, a document may appear complete, but key details may be missing. These omissions are not random. They are the result of deliberate legal decisions about what can and cannot be made public. Redactions serve several purposes. One of the primary reasons is privacy protection. Names, identifying details, or sensitive personal information may be removed to prevent harm or unnecessary exposure. Another reason is ongoing legal considerations. If certain information relates to active investigations or unresolved matters, it may be withheld to avoid interference. Even after a case concludes, some connected issues may still be under review. There is also the issue of confidential sources and methods. Certain details may reveal how information was obtained or who provided it. Protecting these elements can be essential for maintaining the integrity of investigative processes. This leads to selective visibility. Readers can see parts of the document, but not the entire context. This can affect how the material is interpreted, especially when key connections or explanations are hidden behind redactions. Another important factor is legal consistency. Courts must ensure that the release of information does not conflict with existing laws, agreements, or protections. Redaction allows documents to be shared while still complying with these requirements. However, redactions introduce limitations. When sections are removed, the remaining text may lack context. Statements may appear incomplete, and relationships between different parts of the document may be harder to understand. This creates potential for misinterpretation. Without full context, readers may draw conclusions based on partial information. This is why unsealed documents must be approached carefully, especially when significant portions are missing. There is also the concept of layered disclosure. In some cases, documents are unsealed in stages. Initial releases may include heavy redactions, with additional information revealed later as legal conditions change. This means that understanding can evolve over time. What is unclear in one version of a document may become clearer in a later release, but not all gaps are always filled. Another key point is that redaction does not imply irrelevance. The removed information may be highly significant, it is simply not permitted to be disclosed under current legal conditions. Understanding redactions helps clarify an essential idea. Unsealed documents are not always complete records, they are controlled versions of those records, shaped by legal and procedural boundaries. Recognizing these limits is critical when interpreting their meaning. Unsealed documents can provide valuable insight, but on their own, they rarely tell a complete story. To fully understand their meaning, they must be read within a broader framework of context and cross-referencing. A single document is only one piece. It may contain statements, excerpts, or references that point to other materials. Without examining those related records, the information can appear fragmented or incomplete. This is why context is essential. Understanding a document requires knowing when it was created, who produced it, and how it fits within the timeline of the case. A statement made early in an investigation may carry a different weight than one made during trial or after key evidence has been reviewed. Another important factor is interconnection. Legal documents often refer to each other. Motions cite exhibits, exhibits relate to testimony, and testimony connects to broader arguments. These links form a network of information that must be considered as a whole. This process is known as cross-referencing. By comparing multiple documents, patterns and consistencies can emerge. Details that seem unclear in one file may be clarified by another. This allows for a more accurate interpretation of the material. Without cross-referencing, there is a risk of isolated interpretation. Reading a single excerpt without its surrounding context can lead to conclusions that do not reflect the full record. This is especially important when dealing with complex cases involving large volumes of documentation. Another key element is sequence. Documents are created at different stages of a case. Understanding the order in which they appear helps reveal how information developed over time. What was known initially, what was later confirmed, and what may have changed. This timeline perspective is critical. It prevents the assumption that all information carries equal weight or certainty. There is also the issue of legal positioning. Different documents serve different purposes. A filing from one side presents arguments, while a response challenges those arguments. Reading both sides provides a more balanced view than relying on a single perspective. This reinforces a central principle. Unsealed documents must be interpreted as part of a larger system of records, not as standalone evidence. Another complication is volume. In major cases, hundreds or even thousands of pages may be unsealed. Navigating this material requires careful organization and attention to detail. This further emphasizes the need for structured analysis. By grouping related documents, identifying key references, and tracking how information connects, a clearer picture can emerge. Understanding context and cross-referencing leads to a more accurate conclusion. Unsealed documents do not provide answers in isolation. They provide pieces of information that must be assembled and interpreted together. This approach transforms raw documents into meaningful insight. Unsealed documents do not always appear all at once. In many cases, they are released over time, in stages, and under changing legal conditions. This makes timing a critical factor in understanding what these documents mean. The moment a document is unsealed matters. A record released during an ongoing legal process may serve a different purpose than one released after a case has concluded. Early disclosures can shape understanding in real time, while later releases often provide retrospective clarity. This creates a layered timeline of information. Documents may be unsealed in phases, some earlier, some later, depending on court decisions, legal motions, or the resolution of related issues. Each phase adds another piece to the overall picture. However, this staggered release can also create interpretive challenges. When documents are viewed individually, without awareness of the full timeline, their meaning may be misunderstood. A statement that seems significant in isolation may later be clarified, contradicted, or expanded by subsequent releases. This is why sequencing is essential. Understanding which documents came first and which followed helps reveal how the case developed over time. It shows how information evolved, rather than presenting it as a single, static narrative. Another important factor is context at the time of release. A document unsealed during active proceedings may be interpreted differently than the same document reviewed after the case is complete. At the time of release, certain details may still be unknown or unresolved. This affects perception. Early interpretations are often based on partial information, while later analysis benefits from a more complete set of records. There is also the issue of legal triggers. Documents are often unsealed in response to specific events, such as court rulings, motions by legal parties, or the conclusion of related cases. These triggers determine when information becomes available. This means that timing is not random, it is legally driven. Another consideration is revision through release. As more documents become available, earlier assumptions may need to be reconsidered. New information can add context, correct misunderstandings, or highlight connections that were not previously visible. This process reflects the dynamic nature of unsealed records. They do not present a finished narrative all at once. Instead, they contribute to an evolving understanding. There is also the practical challenge of information flow. Public attention may focus on newly released material, sometimes without fully integrating it with earlier documents. This can create gaps in interpretation if the sequence is not carefully followed. Understanding timing leads to a key conclusion. What unsealed documents reveal is shaped not only by their content, but by when and how they are released. Each document is part of a timeline, and its meaning depends on its position within that timeline. Unsealed documents do not speak with a single, neutral voice. Instead, they often contain legal arguments presented by opposing sides, each framing the same material in different ways. This means that interpretation is not only about what is written, but also about how it is presented. Legal filings are inherently argument-driven. When attorneys submit documents to the court, they are not simply listing facts. They are constructing a narrative designed to support their position. This includes selecting certain details, emphasizing specific points, and interpreting evidence in a way that aligns with their argument. As a result, the same piece of information can appear in multiple forms. One side may present it as supporting their claim, while the other may challenge its meaning, context, or reliability. Both interpretations can exist within the unsealed record. This creates competing narratives. Readers must recognize that unsealed documents often reflect positions, not conclusions. They show how each side understood and argued the material at a given point in the case. Another important factor is language and framing. The way information is described can influence how it is perceived. Terms, emphasis, and structure all contribute to how a document is interpreted. Subtle differences in wording can lead to very different impressions. This is why careful reading is essential. Understanding a document requires separating the underlying information from the way it is argued. There is also the role of judicial interpretation. Judges review these competing arguments and determine how they apply within the legal framework. Their rulings provide guidance on which interpretations are accepted, limited, or rejected. However, not all unsealed documents include final rulings. Some represent earlier stages of the case, where arguments were still being developed and contested. In these instances, the material reflects an ongoing process, not a settled outcome. This introduces another layer of complexity. Readers may encounter arguments that were later challenged or refined. Without understanding the progression of the case, it can be difficult to determine how those arguments fit into the final outcome. Another key point is selective emphasis. Legal teams highlight the strongest aspects of their case. This means that certain details receive more attention, while others may be minimized or omitted. This does not necessarily indicate imbalance, it reflects the strategic nature of legal presentation. Understanding this helps prevent misinterpretation. Rather than viewing unsealed documents as definitive accounts, they should be seen as records of advocacy, where different sides present their perspectives within the rules of the court. This leads to a critical conclusion. Unsealed documents reveal not only information, but also how that information was contested and interpreted during the legal process. To fully understand them, one must consider both the content and the arguments surrounding it. Once documents are unsealed, they move beyond the courtroom and into the public domain. At that point, their meaning is shaped not only by their content, but also by how they are interpreted and presented to a wider audience. This is where media framing becomes important. Journalists and analysts review unsealed materials and translate them into accessible narratives. Given the volume and complexity of legal documents, this process often involves selection and summarization. Not every detail can be highlighted. As a result, certain points receive more attention than others, depending on their perceived significance or clarity. This creates a version of the material that is focused, but not comprehensive. Another factor is interpretive emphasis. Different outlets or commentators may focus on different aspects of the same documents. One interpretation may highlight specific statements, while another may emphasize broader context or legal implications. This leads to multiple narratives. Even though the underlying documents are the same, the way they are presented can vary, influencing how they are understood by different audiences. There is also the issue of complexity reduction. Legal documents often contain technical language, layered arguments, and extensive references. Simplifying this information for public consumption can make it more accessible, but it can also remove nuance. This creates a trade-off. Clarity is gained, but detail may be lost. Another important point is timing of coverage. As discussed earlier, documents may be unsealed in stages. Media attention often focuses on newly released material, sometimes without fully integrating it with earlier documents. This can lead to fragmented understanding, where individual releases are interpreted in isolation rather than as part of a larger sequence. There is also the influence of public interest. High-profile cases attract attention, and certain details may be emphasized because they resonate more strongly with audiences. This can shape which parts of the documents become widely discussed. However, public discussion does not change the nature of the documents themselves. The original records remain legal materials, containing a mix of arguments, evidence references, and procedural content. Understanding this distinction is critical. It separates the document itself from the narrative built around it. Another factor is interpretive uncertainty. Because unsealed documents may include unverified claims, partial information, or contested arguments, different readers may draw different conclusions. This reinforces the importance of careful analysis. Rather than relying on isolated excerpts or summaries, a more accurate understanding comes from reviewing the material in context and recognizing its limitations. The result is a layered process. Documents are unsealed. They are interpreted and summarized. Narratives are formed and shared. Each step adds a layer between the original material and public understanding. Recognizing these layers helps maintain clarity. It allows unsealed documents to be viewed as primary sources, while understanding that public interpretation is a secondary process shaped by selection and presentation. The release of unsealed documents is not a single moment. It is the beginning of a longer process of analysis, interpretation, and reassessment. Their impact often extends well beyond the initial release, shaping how a case is understood over time. At first, attention is immediate. Newly unsealed materials are reviewed, discussed, and interpreted. Early reactions often focus on what appears most visible or significant, but this initial stage rarely captures the full meaning of the documents. Over time, deeper analysis begins. Researchers, legal analysts, and observers revisit the material, comparing it with other records, timelines, and previously known information. This process allows for a more structured and comprehensive understanding. This is where patterns emerge. Details that seemed isolated at first may connect with other documents. Statements may gain clarity when viewed alongside additional context. The overall picture becomes more defined as information is integrated and cross-referenced. Another important aspect is re-evaluation. As more documents are unsealed, or as related cases develop, earlier interpretations may be reconsidered. New information can confirm, challenge, or refine previous conclusions. This makes understanding dynamic. Unsealed documents do not create a fixed narrative. Instead, they contribute to an evolving body of knowledge. There is also the role of archival significance. Once unsealed, these documents become part of the public record. They can be revisited at any time, allowing future analysis to build upon earlier interpretations. This long-term accessibility is important. It ensures that the material remains available for continued examination, rather than being limited to the moment of release. Another factor is context expansion. Over time, additional sources, such as related filings, external records, or subsequent disclosures, may provide further context. This helps fill gaps and improve understanding. However, not all gaps are resolved. Some information may remain incomplete due to redactions, missing records, or legal restrictions. These limitations continue to shape interpretation, even in the long term. This leads to a balanced perspective. Unsealed documents provide valuable insight, but they do not always provide complete answers. Their significance lies in how they are used. Through careful analysis, comparison, and contextual understanding, they become part of a broader effort to interpret complex legal events. Another key point is separation between legal outcome and informational content. A case may reach a clear legal conclusion, but unsealed documents can continue to inform discussions beyond that outcome. They add depth, detail, and perspective to what has already been established. This dual role is essential. The trial defines what is legally proven. The documents contribute to ongoing understanding. Together, they create a more complete picture. After examining the purpose, content, timing, and interpretation of unsealed documents, a clear conclusion emerges. Unsealed records are not simple revelations, they are structured releases of complex legal material. They exist at the intersection of transparency and limitation. On one hand, unsealing allows the public to access information that was previously restricted. It provides insight into legal processes, arguments, and documented material connected to a case. On the other hand, that access is controlled. Documents may be partially released, redacted, or presented out of sequence, depending on legal requirements and timing. This means that what becomes visible is not always the complete record. This leads to a critical distinction. Unsealed documents show what was recorded and presented, but they do not automatically show what was proven or confirmed. Understanding this difference is essential for accurate interpretation. Throughout the process, several key factors shape what unsealed documents represent. Legal structure determines what can be released. Redactions limit what is visible. Timing influences how information is understood. Context and cross-referencing define meaning. Legal arguments shape interpretation. Public and media framing affect perception over time. Each of these elements contributes to a layered understanding. No single document provides a complete answer. Instead, unsealed records function as components of a larger system, requiring careful analysis and comparison. Another important point is interpretive responsibility. Because these documents often contain a mix of assertions, evidence references, and procedural material, readers must distinguish between what is claimed, what is supported, what is legally established. Without this distinction, it is easy to misunderstand the significance of what is being read. There is also the matter of ongoing relevance. Even after a case concludes, unsealed documents continue to be examined, discussed, and reinterpreted. Their impact is not limited to the moment of release. They contribute to long-term understanding and historical record. At the same time, limitations remain. Some information may never be fully disclosed due to legal protections, missing context, or permanent restrictions. This means that even with unsealed records, the full picture may remain partially incomplete. This is not a contradiction, It is a feature of the system. Courts aim to balance openness with responsibility, allowing access where possible while maintaining necessary protections. In conclusion, unsealed documents should be understood as access points to previously restricted information, records shaped by legal rules and procedural limits, sources that require context, comparison, and careful interpretation. They are not final answers, but they are essential tools for understanding how a case was built, argued, and documented. And within that framework, they reveal not only information, but also the structure of the legal process itself, how it manages visibility, controls disclosure, and defines what becomes part of the public record. The documents exist. The questions remain. This channel will continue examining what is public, and what is still hidden. If you value documented analysis over speculation, consider subscribing. More files coming.